In the first operation, the Russians made the first landings at the bottom of the Dnieper River, at the airfields at the bottom, civilian and military airfields. They did it. Why? Cut Kiev off from the west and take over Ukraine in a short time. But since the routes of the airplanes that will land in Ukraine here are predetermined, Ukrainian special forces and Ukrainian troops were ready at these landing sites even before the planes arrived here.
I think we can see it up close.
Prepared.
We have a lighter cheese.
So he's going to land. They've learned where to land.
It happens. World cheese.
They wanted to land at the airports in those areas, at the airports west of Kiev, west of Dnieper. But because the landing sites were predetermined, they immediately organized here and shot the landing Russian soldiers. Nevertheless, the Russians they landed with some of their forces and captured some places. And the Russian troops here were destroyed. I wish them well. Now, this is very valuable. Look, the first troops to land are the troops that will decide the fate of the war. If these are destroyed, the following units will not be as professional and fit as these. Armored troops were left stranded on the roads. Now, I have just stated the same thing. Since 2013, Ukraine was attacked by British special forces and American special forces, prepared for the Battle of the City, in particular, west of the Dnieper. Correction, east. Now look, there is a rule. So if a country invades another country, if the army of that country disintegrates or cannot produce enough forces, naturally the people prepare for urban warfare. But the duration of this is not 2 weeks. I mean 1.5 to 2 years. Remember our years of national struggle, right? First we retreat. We retreat east of Sakarya. We tire the enemy in depth, then counterattacks. In the meantime, the Kuvayi Milliye is attacking Greek troops in all cities and in all areas. But look, it took 2 years or so for the Kuvayi Milliye to get organized. How come now? Ukrainian forces here will be back in the country in 2 weeks. They can take up resistance. Since 2013, they have been preparing this place. Let me tell you something more interesting. Direct the Ukrainian war, not the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. American generals, British generals. There's the Moscow, the biggest Russian ship. It's called the flagship. In other words, the biggest ship in every country's navy is the flagship of that country. Here it was the British who sank the Moscow ship. Look at the Kerch Strait. The attacks were carried out by the British. There were explosions in a harbor just over there, if you remember. Again, a Russian landing ship was sunk or something. The British did. Therefore, the initial aim of the Russians was to take over the whole of Ukraine. It didn't happen. They tried to enter Kiev from Belarus. Why did they try to enter Kiev? Because we couldn't do it here. If we take over Kiev, we will take over the administration. We will take over Ukraine again. But that didn't happen either. The offensive columns reached Kiev, but they had to retreat because their forces were exhausted. Then they turned to Kiev in an encircling offensive through Sumy, through Kharkov. The offensive stopped here. They had to go back. As a result, the Russians had to go back to the battlefields at the initial point. This is the failure of the Russians. Even before they started with 4 armies, they increased the operation by 2 armies. With 6 armies, they started to rule. But that's not enough. It was possible. Now, then one has to ask, why are the Russians so stubborn? Why do they necessarily want to enter Ukraine? Why don't they want a permanent settlement in Ukraine? They want to create a situation? We all need to think about the answer to this question. Look at what we received as backstage information at the latest Putin-Trump meeting. Russians in the south, the area up to the Dnieper River. I mean, look at this area, exactly this area. They don't want to go any further. So they want the river to be a natural boundary. But in these areas, I thank Retzi. Look at Luhansk's, Donetsk's. Would you look at their territorial divisions?
Yes. Hoja, for example, there. Ukraine says that we have a lot of fortress cities that Russia cannot capture.
Russia says, it says Donetsk, that is, they called it Donbass. but it says Donetsk. Ukrainian army should get out of these areas, the territorial division there. And from Zaporizhia, let the Dnieper be the border. In this context, it says, let's talk deal. What does this mean? It means that the Russians want to take this much area without a war, or we will continue the war. They want Russian troops to take control.
Of course, he does not accept
Ukraine does not accept this. Europe does not accept it. Britain doesn't accept it at all.
Can I ask a question? Yes, me too. Sir, go ahead. Don't forget your question. I mean, at the end of the day, Russia cannot really succeed in advancing to these borders, right? You ask Hodja, then you can do it.
This is a question in my head, but I will ask it in two parts. I am trying to understand. Now it had come to the suburbs of Kyiv, but we had always read it like that at the very beginning. We said that its aim was not to take Kyiv.
It doesn't. I didn't say that, Hodja.
Okay.
I was of a different opinion.
Because Russia, with all its power, I mean, there is no need to count one by one what Russia is when it sits at the diplomatic table. Russia, Putin, the Kremlin has very clear demands. By the way, I am not saying these demands because I think they are justified. The Ukrainian territory belongs to Ukrainians. I can never say otherwise about it. What international law says is what international law says, but Putin's demands, or Kiev's demands, or Moscow's demands were very clear. There was never anything like destroying Ukraine and incorporating it into Russia and ending Kiev's sovereignty, neither on the table nor on the table. Underneath, we have not heard of such a thing. And the exact question is that all